Hi, I'm Justine. I'm a field ecologist at the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. I have been a moth recorder for many years now. Before I joined CEH, I did a Masters by Research at Lancaster University. But my talk sort of is on two subjects. So it's my Masters by Research and then a little bit on a project that I did the following year after this on a particular moth species associated with the limestone pavement. So my interest really was in moth communities in limestone habitats, but also triple SI condition assessments and whether they're actually of any use to moth communities in general, and whether looking at the individual vegetation characteristics make any difference to the moth communities in these limestone habitats. So so my study sites were Hutton Roof and Fowlerton Knot, which are just to the east of the M6, just above Burton in Kendal. Two reserves, basically, but sort of like one ecological unit, dominated by limestone pavement and calcareous grassland habitats. And there are several different landowners and varying degrees of management, mixed livestock grazing, some sheep, some just cattle, some units not managed whatsoever. So there's a good array of things going on there. So my habitats of interest were calcareous grassland and limestone pavement, and in the interest of time, I'll not go over those. I'm sure you're all well aware of the threats and how they are identified. So yeah, so I was interested in the triple SIs themselves, and I've got a map here that demarcates all of those triple SI units, and I focused on 10 in particular, just because they had sufficient quantities of the limestone pavement and calcareous grassland habitats. So the black stars are the limestone pavement habitat and the red stars are the grassland. So I had 40 individual survey sites in total, 4 per triple SI unit, 2 at each habitat type. And I created 3 condition categories. There are many across the spectrum of favourable to destroyed, but try to sort of group them by favourable, recovering and unfavourable, just in the interest of analysis really. And I visited each of these sites in June and July and August in 2021. So yeah, 4 sites per night was quite a challenge to do all the vegetation, all the moth sampling, so quite a big task. So to survey each of these sites, I think I've looked at 9 different vegetation variables and sampled those along 2 30-metre transects within quadrats. And then I also assessed the positive and negative indicator species along the transects that are actually applied to the triple SI condition assessments for Fowlerton and Hutton Roof respectively. Once I'd done all of this, I left a moth trap at the centre of the 2 transects and returned at dawn begrudgingly to check all the moths. The majority were identified on site. I had to take a few away to identify and get a little bit of specialist help identifying some of them. The nice thing about these traps is, well, the lights, is that they had been tested by a PhD student at Lancaster University before that. He kindly gave me some of them, and he found that the attractive radius of those LED bulbs was about 18 metres. So I was fairly confident that I was sampling vegetation within my survey site. So my main research questions were looking at whether habitat type and condition affected the vegetation composition, moth diversity and community composition, but also the functional diversity and the trait composition of the macro moth community. The trait composition of the macro moth community only is because we don't have any trait data for micro moths. They're just so understudied. We couldn't really look at those. So the main sort of like the broad moth survey results, yeah, just over 3,000 moths were sampled of 174 species. No significant difference in abundance and species richness between the grassland and the limestone pavement habitat. And a significant number of those species were either local or rarer in their national status. And just a few of those species that were quite significant. So this species here is a species of micromoth called Clepsis rurinana. Probably fewer than a dozen records in the whole of the UK. I found 2 individuals on file that are not. New species for Cumbria, Aproarema sangiella, new for both Cumbria and Lancashire. The larvae we've found since feed on Lotus caniculatus. So that we found it at multiple, I found it at multiple sites, and Alicista triceriatella. We tried to find the larvae since, still not been successful, but it was new for Cumbria. It has been recorded in Lancashire before. It's been recorded at Gate Barrows, but nowhere else. And then just a few species that I found significant populations of. This nice little Alicista adsatella, the larvae feed on glaucous sedge, not glaucous sedge, Sesleria, and a few nice gallium carpet feeds on most of the limestone bed straw and the tide pub there. So to the data analysis. So basically, this is broken down by habitat type and the different conditions. And what I found was that forb cover, as you might expect, was higher in the grassland habitats in recovering and favourable condition compared to grasslands in declining condition and pavement in all conditions, as you might expect. And also the similar sort of pattern with the number of flowering forbs as well. And why is this important? Well, because forb cover drove the moth community composition. So this is an ordination plot, and it basically just displays species abundance by site and sort of displays that in 2D format. But there was no sort of difference between the condition types and also the habitat types. The differences seem to be in the community were between the SSI units, but also there's like quite a defining split between the 2 reserves in moth community composition. And the same sort of applied to the trait composition of the macromoths as well. And grass cover, it seems to be the enemy of calcareous grasslands, and it does sort of reduce species richness, but at the same time, the functional richness also increased with the cover of grass. So, you know, finding that balance between the 2, you know, do you want more species or would you prefer that niche space to be filled? And just a little look at the vegetation, I mean, it's quite obvious. We would expect taller woody vegetation at the limestone pavement habitat and the cover of grass to be higher in the grassland. But for some reason, which we probably know the answer to, there were significantly more woodland moth species in the grassland habitat than the limestone pavement habitat, which is not what we would have expected. And there's a possibility that succession is probably playing a role in this. So yeah, basically, forb and grass cover higher in the grassland habitat, and the pavement has the taller woody plant community, which we would expect. But the grassland supports significantly more woodland moth species than the limestone pavement. And the grassland, when it's in favourable conditions, forb rich, and those in unfavourable condition have higher grass cover. But the forb cover contributes to the moth community composition and the trait composition of the macromoths. So habitat type and condition don't explain the differences in the community composition or the trait composition, but there are differences at the landscape scale. So I'll just quickly go on to the next one and fly through it quickly. So the following year, after my master's, I was approached by Gary Hedges at the Sniptra Trust. He was sort of asking whether there were any moth species that needed a little bit of work on in terms of understanding their ecology, and a few of us suggested least minor. And so I was approached to carry out not just a larval search, that's all I'm focusing on today, but it ended up extending to adult searches in Lancashire, in Cumbria, and also parts of the Dales, and sort of ended up combining with the Limestone Lepidoptera project run by Butterfly Conservation there. So least minor is a small day-flying macro moth. It's about that big. There are two subspecies, the form tincta, which occurs in Ireland, found on the Burren, and the form expellita, which we have here in England, and it's restricted to the Morecambe Bay limestone. I think it's found up at Asby, across the Yorkshire Dales and onto the Northumberland coast. And it's a specialist of the open limestone grassland that contains Sesleria. Just to highlight how rare it is, it has the same rarity and threat status as high brown fritillary, and yet we know virtually nothing about it. And the larvae, we assume overwinter part grown, and then they resume feeding in the spring. So for the larval searches, these are my three survey sites. We've got Patton Roof here. This is Craghouse Allotment, the triple SI unit, where which sort of triggered this survey really, because during my masters, when I was out going to carry out my surveys, I observed moths flying across the path amongst the Sesleria as I was walking up, and that gave us a really good targeted area to start our larval searches. And then also we've got Wharton Crag, really good set of recent and historical sightings, and then we have gate barrows as well. Larval feeding signs. So these larval feeding signs, we were advised by Barry Henwood and Phil Sterling. They visited the Burren in, I think it was 2008, and they were out looking for a different species completely, but they ended up finding these larvae, and like, we don't know what they are. We think they might be least minor. They tried to rear them through, but were unsuccessful. But they identified these really key features on the Sesleria that helped us identify where the larvae were. So Sesleria flowers quite early in spring, sort of like March, April, and very quickly you can see these sort of dead and stunted flowering spikes. And if you get down and have a look in the stem, you can find frass. It's usually green when the feeding is quite fresh, and that blackens quite quickly as they move between stems within a stump. I think this just covers that sort of thing. Yeah, that basically just covers what I've just said. So we did find larvae at these three sites, and they're this sort of like creamy yellow colour, brown legs, dark spiracles, dark head, don't vary very much. We found 7 in total. Found 4 at Hutton Roof, 2 at Wharton Crag, and 1 at Gate Barrows. I read them through, and just to be certain that we had found what we were looking for, and 4 emerged, had 1 female and 3 males. And I just dissected them just to make sure, seeing as the larvae had never been found in the UK before. And these sites, so this is the Craghouse allotment site at Hutton Roof. This unit is actually, I think it's in decline, or it's unfavourable. It's not, according to the condition assessment, it's not in great condition. But least minor really like it here, really dense, thick, dominant Sesleria. 2 larvae within 1 clump on the top of the scree slope at Wharton Crag, which was quite unusual. And then this is at Gate Barrows, and I found a larva at the base of some birch scrub. And published the findings in the Entomologist's Record and Journal of Variation, if anybody is interested in reading up on that. So, yeah, least minor can tolerate a range of environmental conditions. The larval food plant grows seems to tolerate a little bit of shade, quite open conditions, quite harsh environments. But we really need some annual monitoring at known sites and to try and identify new sites. And also we need to see whether Carex flaca is used as a larval food plant. It was always thought that that was their main food plant. And Barry and Phil did find larvae feeding on it, so maybe we should still have a little look. And I think habitat management is going to be key to conserving, enhancing and expanding Ceciliaria grassland, which is really threatened by the scrub encroachment and the expansion of woodlands, particularly in the lowland areas. And this is a larva that I found just last week at Gate Barrows. So maybe we could have a little look for them today. And that's it.